So the big question is this: how do passionate golfers like you and I develop a stock shot day in and day out? A stock shot that's as reliable as the sun coming up in the morning. That's the question, and this podcast is the answer. Welcome to Stock Shot Secrets. All right, everybody, welcome back to Stock Shot Secrets. I have an amazing guest today in Adam Young, and Adam is one of the smartest human beings I know. I like to read all of his stuff when it comes out on social media and stuff. So, Adam, super excited to have you here. Welcome.
It's a warm welcome. I'm on my first coffee of the day. I'm not normally up at this time, so
He's on a West Coast. We're on an East Coast, so it's a different type thing. But thank you so much for joining us, and kind of really showing, we'll say, like Stock Shot Nation, like who you are, what your story is. You've got some amazing insights, and you really, I think, from an outsider's perspective, you do the studying and learn the projects that I think about in the middle of the night. And then I just search you up and say, I'm sure Adam's researched this at some time. So I would love maybe if we could just start by just telling a little bit of the origin story of you, how'd you get here? You know, obviously you're not from America. So where did the whole thing start?
I try and keep this stuff short because everybody's bored by who you are. Really, they want how can you help me? But
Right.
I started golf late. I was 15. I suppose my story is a little different to most instructors because most instructors started as players very early on. I wasn't like that. I started golf at 15. That was when I first hit a golf ball. I was playing soccer. That's the main thing that we play. And one of my friends was off practicing and I hit a ball and I was like, wow, that felt amazing. I flushed it the first time I made a swing. Now I didn't for the next 100 swings. So it wasn't that I was naturally talented. I just happened to get lucky on that one and it hooked me. And me being how I am and being the age I was, I got every book out of the library and I was very swing centric. I was looking for the perfect mechanics. I was in a mirror every single night at age 15. So that's just how my brain is wired. And the irony of all of that is now that I'm an instructor, I'm much more on the instinctive end of the spectrum. So I have all this technical knowledge, but I've defaulted to more instinctive approaches of teaching and playing. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Cool. So when that kind of happened, I think one of the first things, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first we'll say publication or really asset that you gave to the recreational player, the passionate player that's trying to get better, was that practice manual, right? So the what was the thought process with creating that? Why was that the first gem that you put out to the public? And what was your ultimate goal and vision behind that?
So, I mean, on my vision board, and I'm the type of person who does that kind of stuff, I wrote something down, which is, one of my main goals was to do something to change the golf industry. And the golf industry is very, very swing centric. There's not a problem with that. But I saw a gaping hole with, the skill elements and the mental side of it. I'm not talking about, being relaxed and expectations. I'm talking about things like intent. That's missing from a lot of things. And, basic example of this, if you're teaching a beginner to chip the ball, you have the mechanical aspects of it, like, okay, put some weight on the left side, a little bit of forward shaft lean. But then you'd have a player, they'd go on their back foot and try and release it to try and get under the ball. And so that's an example of where the mechanics are fighting the intent of the player. And so, as an early instructor, I used to bash on these mechanics, keep your weight left, keep your weight left. And people just couldn't do it. And it was only when I would ask them, what are you trying to do with the club and ball here? And they would tell me, well, I'm trying to get the club to go under the ball and scoop it in the air. And so when I started to explain, no, this is actually how the club should work. This club should work like a plane. It should gently land on a spot very close to the ball. All of a sudden, they were able to do the mechanics much better. And so, I started to think of other areas where that could be true. So, maybe you have a player who's chronically over the top and they're swinging 10 degrees left. And obviously I would go through all the mechanical ways, get your arms here, change a pivot here, which can all be beneficial, definitely. But what I would say, well, how can I change this player's intent? So, I'm not famous, golf instructor is not famous, but if someone asks about Adam Young, they're like, oh, I know that guy. It's because of the nail drill, right? Which is basically I've got a golf ball with a
Uh-huh.
nail through it. So I've actually driven a nail through the golf ball,
Through the top or the side?
straight through the middle,
Okay, got
straight
it.
through the middle of it. And so I could then place that ball on the ground and I could angle the nail in different directions. So if I angled that nail to the right and asked that player, could you hammer this nail? They're now tapping into their instinct. And just
Hmm.
simply the intent of hammering that nail to the right, all of a sudden their body mechanics started to change. I mean, number one, they weren't over the top anymore. Their path was inside out and they were hitting draws for the first time in their life. But number
Yep.
two, I started to notice, wait there, their mechanics are changing as well. Their sequence changed, their
Yep.
backswing changed. And so that goes into the concept of self organization. So self organization is where you give someone an intent, like, land the club here or hammer this nail, and you get the
Yep.
mechanics for free. The swing evolves for free.
100%. Yep.
And so, there are loads of examples of that. I mean,
So,
not everything
so
can be done through intent alone. Sometimes you do have to jump in there and dig in with the
yeah.
mechanics directly, but there's a lot of stuff you can do just through
So would
intent.
it so would it be fair to say, because we could go a while on this topic even alone. I have a feeling we could probably sit here and talk for about 7 or 8 hours, but
Easily.
we'll keep it short for the listeners. But would it be fair to say that you were externally driven as the instructor? So, for example, you have a guy whose mass is, or girl whose mass is like behind the ball and they fat it and like they scoop and blah, blah, blah. And you would say, hey, I need you to, let's see like how far you can hit it with at hitting it as low as you can with like the shortest follow through that you can. So
Yeah.
it's like
So
they have an intent to a ball flight, and then what ends up happening is the pattern. They obviously like get more on top of it. They pinch it harder, so on and so forth, and therefore they're externally driven by a ball flight, which therefore internally changes what they're feeling, and then their mechanics change consequently. Whereas the instructing world, in your opinion, almost does it the opposite.
Yeah, so there's actually three levels here. You have the most of the instruction world is very internal focused, moving your body a certain way. So think of your left
Yep.
arm, think of your shoulders. There's
Yep.
completely external, which is focusing on the ball flight. Can you hit the shape? Can you hit it under a tree? Kind of Harvey Penick
Yep.
stuff. And then
Yep.
there's this middle ground. I actually focus much more on the middle ground. It's still outside of the body. So in terms of motor learning science, it's still classed as external, but
Uh
it's
huh.
more to do with the task of impact. So an example of what a good drill that you can do is to get into a fairway bunker. I used to do this all the time. Get into a fairway bunker, rake the bunker flat with the back of the rake, and then draw a line in.
Yep.
And then I can ask players, can you hit this line first? And the first few times they do it, they hit like 6 inches, 8 inches behind. And
Right.
because they got their weight on their back foot. But then what I
Right.
noticed was, well, if I just give them 5 minutes, they figure it out. Okay, I can move this ground contact forwards.
Yep.
And what I noticed was their weight shift started to come for free. I wouldn't have to tell them about it. In
Yep.
fact, when I started to get them to focus on weight shift, their weight shift got worse and their ability to hit the line got worse. Whereas when I got them to focus on the line, their weight shift got better and their line contact got better. Then I could
Yep.
add on, I could layer onto that. I would be like, okay, can you hit this line whilst taking a deeper divot of sand? Versus, and then we'd experiment, can you hit this line taking a thin divot of sand? And so they'd start
Yep.
to develop different things. They'd start to
Yeah.
sequence their body different. Then I could say, could you hit this line and send the sand more to the right or more to the
Yeah.
left? And now all of a sudden they've got weight shift and they're starting to change their path.
That's awesome. Yep.
Could you send the sand higher or lower? So there's loads of things you could do with this, just with a
Yep.
sand drill
That
alone.
that sand drill was you'll like this. I don't know if you've seen the golf room, but in my big master dinosaur pin, I was like eerily close to putting a sand a sand thing like in front of my tee box
All right.
because of the fact that the sand drill that you did, that was taught to me by my instructor, Mike Bender, in that sand drill for low point. And it's like one of the best drills ever. Because, and that's why like those junior golfers and stuff, like the ones that grow up in Florida, they're so good because, man, if you hit it a little fat on sand, like it tells you in a hurry.
Yeah.
So you learn like how to pinch it pretty hard, which is awesome. So
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
now
and
you
then they
can
kind
do
of,
it with like a divot board. Have you ever seen the divot
yeah,
board
yeah,
training aids?
yeah,
No, yeah. So it's a
yeah,
little less messy. You can do that at
yeah.
home. So yeah.
Yeah, and for you, I think it aligns with one of my little whatever slogans, if you will, of like proper swings give proper feelings. So like now you're having them do that, and you can say to them, "What did you feel when doing that?" Because that was proper, and they could say whatever the hell they want. They're like,
Yeah.
"Feels like I'm scratching my armpit." You go, "Sick, man." Good job. Just keep doing that because he hit the line, right? So it didn't make, it allows them to ultimately do it, and then they can kind of almost self-discover. And there's a lot of value in self-discovery, right? It's kind of the analogy I always use, Adam, is kind of like people are always like, hey, you need like hands-on teaching. I'm like, well, if I got 3 kids. If I take my kid and I put my hand on top of their hand and make her write the letter A and I'm guiding, she's not learning anything.
Yeah.
She's got to learn how to do it on her own and fail. And like, she's like, oh, I got to self-correct and like do this stuff, which is kind of what you're doing in regards to like, oh, I'm missing the sand line. Like, let me try this. And like, let me do that with, they know that they're having an intention of what they're trying to actually do. So
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. I love that. So
Yeah.
kind of building up.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
In fact, on the topic of failure, I actually do certain drills where I encourage people to actively fail because that's been shown. I mean, even just in my own studies, has been shown to increase the improvement rate. So an example of a drill that I did is in terms of face strike, hitting the sweet spot. Probably most people know the drill where you just spray the club face with Dr. Scholl's
Yeah.
foot spray and then try and bash the sweet spot out of it. Well,
Yeah.
I found kind of unintentionally that if I asked players to spend 10 shots hitting toe and then 10 shots hitting heel, they were much better then at hitting the center than if someone had spent 30 shots trying to hit the center.
Yeah.
So that kind of intentional failure, or I call it experimentation or exploration, is actually, it ended up being called something called differential practice in the motor
Yep.
learning science. So
Yeah.
lots of this stuff found me afterwards.
Yeah, I remember listening to and some of the listeners might know, but I remember talking to James Ridyard, who's from England as well. But we were talking about wedges, and he was saying something very similar of like, hey, yeah, when I do wedges control, and we have like the blocks and the towels out there or whatever, and it's 80 yards, it's like, okay, you got to go. Let's go 78, then go 82, and now hit the 80. So it's just like basketball. It's like, okay, if you're like air ball, then throw one in the backboard, and now you find the middle. So it's kind of finding the 2 parameters, and then you lock it into the middle. But there's something to be definitely said about understanding, like, hey, here's how you make a swing direction go left. Here's how you make it go right, and like you kind of goof around a little bit. What do you find, and kind of piggybacking a little bit more on this practice stuff? What is it? Because you kind of have. You write a lot of stuff about practice and in the practice manual. Like, what do you find? And I might be asking the same question that we just had, but where is it that the passionate recreational golfer, right, 10 handicap, what is it that they're missing mostly in their practice? Hey guys, I hope you are enjoying this episode of the Stock Shot Secrets podcast. If you are enjoying it, be sure to like this episode. Be sure to subscribe so you can always see when they're coming out. And most importantly, if you would be so kind to be able to share this podcast with other passionate golfers who are trying to get better and build stock shots, because it grows through you sharing it. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now back to Stock Shot Secrets.
A feedback loop. A very simple feedback loop. After each shot, ask yourself, what happened at impact with the club, and then relate it. You can relate it to a change that you want to do, but always there needs to be that step. People go from ball flight straight to swing, and often the connection is not even there. They connect dots that aren't there, I would say. So they would, example of this might be they hit it left, the ball goes way left, and then they say, I came over the top of it. And the reality is they might have swung from the inside and just presented a super closed face. So the
Right.
understanding of actually what happened as well. So,
Yeah.
as a teacher, my main gift that I can give someone, or what I do with them, is I teach them a process. So it's right, the ball flight did that. What happened at impact? And now what tools do you have to be able to change that? Now that could be a technical thing, could be a swing
Yep.
thing, or it could just be a pure intent thing. But
Yep.
understanding the impact, understanding how to interpret ball flight to impact, and then having some tools to be able to change that is key.
So we have like we do something that's very very similar in the fact that we have what we talk it's the same term as what I had kind of learned from P and Lynn when I worked, because P and Lynn from Vision 54 were my mental coaches when I played
Yeah.
professionally. Is like you have, your think box, play box, memory box. But in the memory box, we have a kind of a framework which is very similar to what you're saying, which is assessing it, correcting it, and leaving it. So you ACL it, right? So you have to assess like what is happening with the ball flight. Why did I do what I do? And usually, I always say, Adam, like your stuff is your stuff. So like, I've been married. I'm going to be celebrating 16 years of marriage, 22
Congrats.
married years together next week, actually.
Awesome.
And the stuff that my beloved wife complains about me now is the same stuff she complained about when we started dating. So, and that is just because my stuff is my stuff. So there is something to be said about like my golf swing, right? Like my right hand gets a little on top. I take it a little inside. Face can be a little bit open up the top. I'll kind of like shallow it, then tip it out and throw it left. Like, hi, my name's Kyle. Nice to meet you. So the idea is that, to what you're reiterating, is that the player needs to have an understanding of like what these things are, because now they can make the correct adjustments. It's just like, I'm going to the Ohio State Notre Dame game next week for the national championship because I'm a big Ohio State fan. Like, they're going to need to make adjustments in the game based upon what's happening in the game.
Yeah.
If the first drive doesn't work, they just don't go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have it today." They have to be able to like read the ball flight or read the game and then make the necessary adjustments so that the rest of the game is not a loss. And a lot of amateur golfers, like to your point, they work on something, and we always say it's like they're working on smoke rather than fire. They're working on something that's actually going to make no difference at all. Like, you have to know what the leading domino is. So piggybacking a little bit more on this whole idea of impact, right? Like, what are these? Can you tell a little bit about this discovery that what you have of developing the 7 laws of impact? Like, what are the laws? What is it? And maybe we can, the listeners can really, this can also help their IQ in learning some of the secrets that you've discovered.
Yeah. So impact determines everything about the result. I don't like to say it's the most important thing in golf. I do say that because some people argue, well, you got to still drive to the golf course, right? So driving to the course is
Yeah,
the most important
right.
thing. Yeah, you can't play.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah,
we can
yeah.
get
We
down
get
ridiculous holes with that. But
it.
yeah,
Right.
impact is the thing that determines the outcome. Okay.
Yeah.
You can't really tell the quality of a shot just by looking at the swing. So even a tour player, if you look at their swings where they blast it off the planet left and right, and they occasionally do that. You look at their swing mechanics on TV, and it's basically identical to their other swing. There's actually been research done on this where they
Yeah.
hook people up to like super accurate data. You see the difference between left and right might be something like this with the wrist. It's
Yeah.
imperceptible. So they're I call them micro mechanics. So it's the thing that determines between your good and your bad shots. Like you say, everybody has patterns. The good news is you don't need huge changes to hit your best shots more often. So I was always thinking, well, how can this swing looks exactly the same as the other one, yet they performed completely different. What was the difference? And the
Mm-hmm.
difference was in impact. So, I mean, to cut a long story short-ish, there are 7 things that impact that determine the outcome. And I'm actually going to make this much simpler. Ground contact. So where your club lands on the ground, very important with irons or anytime your ball is on the turf. Face contact. So do you hit toe or heel or center?
Yep.
Face direction. So are you presenting the face more open or more closed? Then we have path. So is that club working more left or more right through impact? We have speed. Obviously, how fast is that club moving at impact? And then there's angle of attack, which is the club, imagine it like a plane. Is it
Ooh,
crash landing on the ball or is it landing gently, just wheels touching down? And then you have dynamic loft. So every club has a
right,
loft, but what we present might be different.
right.
Now, out of those seven things, you can actually convert it and you can focus only on three. In fact, you could combine two of them. So the big three that I talk about, ground contact and face contact, they can actually be combined into one element. So I figured this out by a drill I used to do I used to give people an old golf club, an old 7-iron, and we used to go out onto the patio and there was concrete on the ground. And I would draw a little dot with marker pen on the ground, and I would say, hit that spot for me. And again, just like the sand drill, right? The first time someone hits it, they hit 6 inches behind. After a while, they can start to hit this spot. And what I noticed was obviously the front to back element, whether they hit in front of the spot or behind, relates to fat and thin contacts. Too far in, too far behind is a fat shot. Too far in front or not hitting the spot at all is a thin shot. But also, you have the lateral component. If they hit the ground too close to their feet, that's actually a toe shot. And if
Mm-hmm.
they hit the ground too far away from their feet, that was a heel shot. So anytime I got a shanker to do that drill, they were constantly hitting the ground too far away from their feet. And within minutes, they could figure out how to hit it closer to their feet. So you can kind of
Yeah,
triangulate
yeah,
or like a crosshair,
yeah,
you can combine ground contact and face contact. So if I could get someone to just hit that spot, and if I could get them to control where the face was looking, that's kind of the Pareto principle of golf. I'd say is even 95% of the outcome is determined by those three things.
yeah.
If you can then add on doing it at speed, doing it with a good path, you just optimize things, but they're almost
Yeah.
not needed. If I want someone
Well,
to play their best golf, those two tasks are the most important.
well, especially too because they did a study at Golf Digest a couple years ago, which is why some of the stuff that you've done has been so popular. And they asked the amateur golfer, "What is the most important thing for you to play golf, or for you in golf?" And it wasn't lower scores, it wasn't hitting stock draws, it wasn't hitting stock shots. It was
Mm.
making solid contact. Because if you're in the middle of the fairway and you lay the sod over it, you want to get punched in the chin. Like, it's miserable. But and I always say, like, we've got all these TrackMan at the golf room, and I always say, like, the attack angle, which is what you're talking about, like the angle of descent coming in and your ground contact. And then if you also take it one more step to what you're saying of heel and toe, but the attack angle is like, that's like the fun factor number. Like, if you have an attack angle with a 7-iron down at 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, like, the ball melts on the face and you're
Mhm.
like, this is amazing. I think I want to play tomorrow. And it doesn't even necessarily matter if it goes left or right, maybe a little bit, right? But it's more of like, that felt flushed. Whereas even if you thin the wind and it is straight, but it feels like trash, you're like, I suck. I'm ready for a cocktail. Like, this
Yeah.
sounds miserable. This is miserable. So that interaction with that impact is really, really important. And obviously with heel and toe, like, gear effect always wins, right? So, like, if you make a great shot and it's off the heel, like, that ball's going right for that
Mhm.
right-handed golfer. So super, super. When you're doing some of that stuff and you're creating, like, some of these practice plans, like in the
Mhm.
practice manual and all that kind of stuff, how do you advocate setting up some of these drills? Like, when are they doing those drills? Is it something that you would say, hey, let's just say you're doing the sand drill? Is that
Mhm.
something that's happening at the beginning of their practice, at the middle of their practice? Are they interchanging and going back and forth? Like, what's the rhythm of the practice look like to kind of gain some of these skills, in your opinion?
Yeah, so the process that I go for most people, because obviously everybody's short of time, they need
Yep.
efficiency. So the most efficient thing is to figure out of those three things that I've said, ground contact, face direction, figure out which one is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. And you can just
Yep.
look at on course stuff. This is what I do in an on course lesson. They hit shots and I assess those things with people. And at the end of it, typically if someone hits a shot short of the green, which is very, very common, it's going to be either a face contact issue or a ground contact issue. And for the
Yep.
most part, it'll probably be a ground contact issue. So, say someone comes to me and they're like, I'm shooting 90s, I'd love to shoot in the 80s. You can pretty much guarantee, well, let's work on ground contact. That
Hmm.
might be the biggest bang for your buck. Maybe they're a shanker. Okay, they get occasional bouts of shanks, and then that just ruins their round, and they can't seem to fix it. Okay, that player needs to work on face contact. Okay, so say we got our
Right.
shanker, and they say, right, good days are good, bad days I get the shanks, horrible. Okay, now we say, right, we've got that element, face contact, let's go and work on it. So the first drill I would actually do with that player is spray the face, and I would get them to go off and practice hitting toe shots. Not
Yep.
centered shots. I would get them to hit the toe, learn how to hit the toe. And it could be as simple as make a putting swing, hitting with the shiny part of the toe, just to do 10 shots for me, just to entertain me for a moment. And usually they figure out that they actually flush it when they're trying to do that. So they can't do it. Like the intention for them to hit the toe gives them sweet spot strikes. And so that's a lesson in itself. Now, it may take 5 minutes, it may take a week for them to learn how to hit the toe. But once they do, they're developing that skill now. And then we can actually ask them to hit the heel. So do the thing that they're trying to avoid. I'd want them to build both skills.
Yep.
And then once they've got, I can hit the toe as a skill and I can hit the heel as a skill, then we move on to calibration, which is trying to find that center point, right?
Yep.
But now they've got the feels for either end of the spectrum. And so this is where learning gets like put on hyperspeed. So yeah, a practice drill, a practice plan might look like pick the weakest area of your game, ground
And
contact, face
identifying
direction.
one of the three things.
Yeah. Then
Yep.
do a little experimentation. So explore the scale for a little bit, then calibrate, find the middle
Yep.
ground, and then finally finish it with some kind of game, simulate golf. So you might pick a target in the distance, say between this marker and this marker. I'm going to do a full routine and see if I can hit that shot, going through the act of lining
Yep.
up. That's going to help with the transference of those skills to the
Yep.
course. So it's kind of
Yeah.
in an hour, you could do 15 minutes of yeah, 15 minutes of each would be good, or 20
Yeah.
minutes of each if you're doing experimental calibration transference.
Yeah. So ours is very, very similar again in the fact that when we are identifying the practice plans of like whether we're doing it for our players online or if we're doing it players at the golf room or whatever, it follows a framework of program, block, random, compete.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of what you said, just in different words. It's programming like, okay, we're going to set up and just make sure the fundamentals, like reprogram our brain of what we're doing. Like, okay, this is a good grip. Like, this is my ball position. Like this is kind of like where just reminding ourselves of what it is so that we're kind of like resetting the goal for the day. Then it's
Mm.
into that block practice to the point of like we're creating a pattern and we're doing that pattern perfectly every single time. Right. So if it's hitting the toe, it's like toe, toe, toe,
Yeah.
toe, 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 toe. Then after that, then we go into a random phase, which is kind of learning. It's probably just added one more phase where it's taking that new pattern and seeing if we can bring it into the elements of different shots every single shot through full routine.
Mm.
Trying to mix those worlds, and then the competing is almost like we just need you to win. So it's like
Mm.
you're doing something under high stress, and it should end with either a fist pump or almost breaking a club over your knee. Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of following that. And whether you're doing it for 10 minutes or an hour, it kind of always falls under that program, block, random, compete. And you'll actually like this. I was talking, we had one of my good friends, if you happen to know him, is Ian Highfield. Do you happen to know
Mm.
Ian?
Yeah, I know Ian.
So Ian had a pretty cool thing that he was on our podcast a couple weeks ago. And it was interesting because you'll like this as a practice guy. So I'll share it, and I'll also share it just with our listeners, is the idea of essentially to learn a new motor pattern. So if we do this in the realm of like studying for a test, right? I actually told a kid this yesterday because she was like, I was up till 2 a.m. cramming. I'm like, well, you're not going to know. You didn't actually learn anything. So the study just kind of goes, at least from what I've read, and I kind of went back and looked more on this on what Ian would says, was that if someone was studying for a test, they're better off if they have their flashcards and they study the flashcards, and then when they feel like they got it, they should leave and go watch a Netflix show. and
Mhm.
then come back and then study it. So like once we get the feeling in golf and you go, man, I feel like I was hitting the toe, hitting the toe, hitting the toe, hitting the toe. Then it's like, hey, in a perfect world, it'd be like, you should, and let's just say that was in irons. It's like, you should go work on your bunker play, or you should go like watch, Adam's social media stuff for 5-10 minutes, because you're trying to create gapping between the shots. Because that's kind of like golf. It's like I flush a driver. Well, now I got to walk 3 minutes and I got to find that feeling again while in the fairway. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, that element of practice gets really lost in the fact that there's so much raking and hitting in practice. Like when I sat down with Jack Nicklaus, one of the things that he told me is I was like, I asked him a similar question to you, but as a player, and I was like, what does your practice look like? And he goes, I hit 35 balls in 2 hours. And I'm
Mhm.
like, what? That's insane. I'm like, why? And he looked at me and he's like, what do you mean, why? He's like, Kyle, if you go play golf and you shoot 72, how many shots do you think you take? I go, I don't know, probably about 35. And he's like, how long does that take? I go, 4 hours. And he goes, so I'm going too fast. I'm like, and that's why you're better than I am. so, so, so it's one of those arts, but it kind of falls in this whole thing of like building skill, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of which is kind of, it's not an unconventional way. It's actually kind of like a very common sense way. But with kind of one of the final questions that I want to ask you, last one or two, you've got these common sense ways in which you're helping players develop impact and key strike points on the face and all these things. But what about in your world? And maybe it isn't, but what is the role of technology for the player, and how does that incorporate? Like, what is your role with relationships like products like TrackMan and so on and so forth
Mhm.
in this customer journey to get better?
Well, yeah, when I first started doing all this impact stuff, it was before TrackMan was out. And so I used to do a lot of drills that were similar to what I would do with TrackMan. Like I would talk about path, and I would give people a spectrum. I would say this is
Yeah.
-1, -2, -3. This is
Yep.
+1, +2, +3. So I draw lines on the ground with spray paint. And then when I heard about TrackMan, I was like, oh my God, I've got to have that to be able to actually quantify and measure the stuff that I'm
Right.
doing. But I
Yep.
couldn't afford it at the time. So I had to, just jump on the occasional one. Someone had one like 20 miles
Yeah.
down the road. And I used to jump on it.
Yep.
But now, yeah, I have a GC quad now. I love it. But I would say it's not needed 100%. It's good to get on there and check things that you can't see, like attack angle. It's
Hmm.
good to check your path occasionally, but there's a lot that the ball flight can tell you as well. So, you know, the things that I pay very close attention to are where I struck the face, toe or heel, and also where I struck the face vertically, because all the stuff I've done, and if you look at my social media, I've done a lot of modeling of
Yeah.
different angle of attacks and different dynamic lofts and where how it relates to where you strike on the face. And basically, if you strike between groove 3 and 5 on the face, you've struck the ground correctly.
Right.
As long as you've got that negative angle of attack. If you're hitting up on it, all bets are off, right? But for most
Yep.
people, they've actually got a negative angle of attack. So you can look at vertical contact and horizontal contact and get a ton of information, and all that requires is just a bit of spray, a bit of foot spray. And then
Yeah.
in terms of the ball flight, I use simple algorithms in my own game. If the ball finished left, too far left, I open the face a little bit more. If the ball finished too far right, I close the face a little bit more. And
Yeah.
if the ball is going on my target, I'm happy. And if it's the right amount of shape, I'm super happy. Now, if it's going on my target and it's a big shape, like say it's going like 30 yards of curvature, that's when I know,
Yeah.
okay, I might have to go into the path here.
Yep.
So for the most part, you can just deal with, getting the face angle better, and it turns your shape into the optimal version of your shape.
That's amazing. That's amazing. The what was I gonna? Oh, I did have a question. This is a math, and I don't know if you know the answer or not. I don't know the answer, but you're super smart and you're smarter than me, so you might know because you've done all this stuff. Do you happen to know, because I just did some YouTube videos on this, and I did a webinar on it 2 nights ago, and we know to the point of what you just said, so for like a distance wedge, 60 to 120 yards, right? Like you're just kind of your normal middle of the fairway, par 5, I'm hitting a wedge. If we can hit that thing on groove 3 or so, it's kind of like a spin multiplier. Do you happen to know how much what happens with the, like I said, this is a deep question. Maybe you don't know the answer. I don't know either. So I'm just I got you. So I'm going to ask. Do you happen to know how much spin roughly that imparts more on the face? And secondly, when you're launching it lower when you're hitting that on groove 3, 4, 5, it obviously launches it lower. Do you happen to know what that is? Because it also, like, I mean, we could start talking about like spin lofts, and we could start going into a lot of stuff, which probably makes some of the listeners go cross-eyed. But do you happen to? I mean, it's like that spin multiplier that launches it lower, creates more spin. You know, it's really cool flighting. Have you ever researched anything in regards to that stuff?
Yeah, actually, my last blog, November 16th, that I did a study on that exact topic. It wasn't
Oh,
from
cool.
100 yards, but
Okay.
it was 60 yards, and I hit
Yeah.
off 2 different types of lie. I hit one off the range mat, which is kind of firm and
Yep.
bouncy, and then I hit one off a fiber built mat, which is more like bristles, so it simulates
Yep.
grass a bit better. And what I found was, as you hit higher on the face, the spin comes down, which makes sense, right? Higher on the
So,
face,
yeah,
spin
yeah.
comes down, or the lower on the face, you could say the spin goes up, spin multiplier, as you said.
Right.
To a certain point, once it becomes a
Yeah.
bladed shot, then all bets are
Yeah.
off.
Right.
And it was off the range mat. It was very significant. On low on the face, kind of like groove 2, 3, spun about 5,500 RPMs, and high on the face, which was it would be just above 0 on a TrackMan, like 0 to 5 millimeters, so above the center of the face.
Yeah.
That was 4,000 RPM. So you're
Oh, wow.
dropping
1,500.
30%.
Yeah.
That's
Which
right?
is
Yeah,
probably
1,500 RPMs.
I mean, I'm taking a subjective stab at number, but that would, off my opinion, that would probably be a difference of like 4 yards of probably roll ish, 3 or
Yeah,
4,
plus
maybe
the extra
5.
distance, plus the extra carry
Yeah.
distance when a ball launches
Yeah.
high and has lower spin. And this had nothing to do with more grass being trapped between the face either. If I did
Yeah.
that on a real grass lie, that would be probably exaggerated even further. What it has to
Yeah.
do is actually the bounce up effect through impact.
Yeah.
So when a club is in contact with the ball, it could either continue to work down, or it could hit the ground and bounce up.
Yep.
And so when you're on a super tight lie, if you're hitting high on the face, you're effectively hitting the ground early. So you're getting more of that bounce up
Yep.
effect.
Which, as a side note, which would almost be like your sky driver almost, because your sky driver comes from like a kind of steep and then behind it, and then they hit the top of the crown.
Yeah,
Would that
well,
be fair
like
to
a
say?
drop kick in a way. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
a mini drop kick. And the thing is, all of these shots that I studied, they were actually they weren't super fat shots. They were
Yeah.
reasonably good strikes for all of them. But
Yeah.
just that act of hitting an inch behind the ball created 1,500 less, fewer RPMs of spin.
Yeah.
So because of that bounce up effect. Now, if you want to really experience this, I'm sure you've hit shots on a lie board, one of those
Yeah.
old PVC
Yeah. Yeah.
plastic things, and the club
Yeah.
bounces up. What happens is the ball flies a freaking mile. Why? Because that club, the bounce up effect is even more. So you get reduced spin loft. The ball launches high with much less spin than it would normally, and the ball flies 20 yards farther. So people hit
Yeah.
on these lie boards and they go, "Oh, these clubs are amazing. They're
I'm
flying
gonna
20
buy the
yards farther."
club.
Then they go out in the grass and it's flying 20 yards shorter, and they're like, "What's
Right.
going on here?" And it's not the fault of the club fitter. It's just the tools that they were using at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I mean, lie boards can be useful, but to get the distance, I wouldn't
We
get them off a lie board.
as we sign off here, as the practical way of doing that, when I was playing, what I would do as a player is I would tee up my wedges on the range, and I would tee them up really, 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 really low,
Yeah.
and then try to pick them right off the tee, trying to strike that groove 3 to 5. So
Yeah.
And kind of illustrating another story that we were talking about, because you were talking about hitting dots on the stuff. Mike Bender, my coach, told me a story once where he was working with Mac O'Grady. You like this? And they were driving from California to Florida, and Mac gave Mike a 7-iron and said, every single time you're pumping gas from here to Florida, I need you to walk outside and smack the 7-iron against the ground. And if I can see the 7-iron, the number 7-iron, when you show up to Florida, I'm never teaching you again. Because he's trying to get him to learn how to smack that thing into the ground and create that ground contact. So all Adam, amazing stuff. Man, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel like we could talk here forever, but I don't want to monopolize your time. And I know it's very precious. But if our listeners want to get more information on you and learn about some of these really cool, simple concepts, where can they do that?
AdamYoungGolf.com. Or if they're readers and they want to read the practice manual, on Amazon, the practice manual, the ultimate guide for golfers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, buddy. I really appreciate it. Stay warm there in Las Vegas. You're a lot warmer than we are in here in Columbus. And thank you so much for joining Stock Shot Secrets. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to the latest episode of Stock Shot Secrets. Now, as a listener of Stock Shot Secrets, I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to get better. So if you were to go to stockshotclub.com, I'm going to give you 7 days free access where you can send us your video and we will give you personalized individual attention as to what you need to do so that you can start building stock shots. So just go to stockshotclub.com and register there. We'll give you 7 days free where you can try it. And then if we like it, you can stay inside the Stock Shot Club where we can become your coach and walk with you for your entire journey. Thank you so much. And be sure to go visit stockshotclub.com.